Few people in Washington today have more power and influence than Stephen Miller. He's the architect of the Trump administration's hardline immigration policy, and he's the president's enforcer, making sure that the MAGA elite and the cabinet stay true to Trump's vision. Tonight, a close look at the beliefs and the record of Stephen Miller. Next.
This is Washington Week with The Atlantic. Corporate funding provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, Charles Hamowy through the Charles Hamowy Fund, Steve and Marilyn Kerman, Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again, from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic and moderator, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight. We're going to try to understand some of the most important and disruptive Trump policies through the prism of one aide, Stephen Miller. He's no ordinary aide, as you all know. He's been with Trump since the beginning of his improbable run as the 21st century's most important political leader, and no one seems to understand the president and his impulses better than Miller. He's also a revolutionary. His ideas come from far outside what we used to think of as the Republican mainstream, and he's a vociferous, uncompromising advocate for policies that only a few years ago would have been deemed unworkable and extreme. Joining me tonight are four reporters who have covered Miller for years and know him well. Leigh Caldwell is the chief Washington correspondent at Puck. McKay Coppins is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Zolan Kanno-Youngs is a White House correspondent at The New York Times. And Ashley Parker is a staff writer, also at The Atlantic. Thank you all for joining me. All of you have covered Miller for years. You've written a lot about Miller. Ashley, you very recently, Leigh very recently. But I want to just start at the beginning. McKay, why don't I go to you, because you wrote the sort of definitive early profile of Stephen Miller in 2018. So where does he come from? Like, where did his politics develop? Give us a little sense of the forces that created the Stephen Miller we know of today, before he entered the general political consciousness.
Yeah, I think the thing that most struck me in talking to him years ago when I was profiling him was how much of his political worldview was forged in opposition to his upbringing, right? He grew up in Santa Monica, family of very well-off, progressive Jewish parents, and was surrounded by what he would describe as kind of a bubble of progressive affluence, right? He went to a high school where they would have, multiracial retreats and, multiculturalism festivals. And his first exposure to conservative politics was actually reading on a lark Guns and Ammo magazine, which then led him to people like Rush Limbaugh, Larry Elder, David Horowitz, the kind of prominent conservative talk radio hosts and polemicists of the time. And you can see from the very beginning, as a teenager in a very liberal high school, him kind of mimicking the political style of those people.
Wait, you mentioned the high school. Just watch with me for one moment a quick clip of this is Stephen Miller running for
student government.
Student government. Watch this.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash when we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us?
So first of all, the Che Guevara look really is doesn't do that anymore. He's really into the silk suits now or something. But you wrote, part of your profile was focused on the fact that he's an expert troll. And so in your study of him and your conversations with him back then, was he just trolling his liberal friends or liberal adversaries? or was that something more serious?
Well, this was actually kind of the mystery of Stephen Miller to everybody who knew him at every stage of his life. In high school, later at Duke, when he went to college, everyone was trying to figure out if this was performance art or if he really believed it. And you know, that was a classic example of teenage Stephen Miller. But he would write, you know, columns for the Duke campus newspaper, picking culture war fights on campus. What I think, you know, where I landed, because I asked him about this a bunch of times, and he at first would say, no, I believe everything that I say. But then he at one point said, I do believe in constructive controversy for the sake of enlightenment. Those were his words. And I think that gets at something fundamental about him, which is he has always believed that there is a role for provocation and performance in politics.
So actually, let me ask you this. Does he go further rhetorically than he actually believes? Or when you're listening to him, especially in this second Trump term, is what he's saying what he actually believes? Is he trying to just provoke and kind of then he'll bring it back a little bit?
I mean, again, I think with him at this point, both things are true, but we have sort of come full circle to where the caricature has become the character, and it's really hard to differentiate. You see in some of those early high school videos of Stephen Miller, him sort of occasionally breaking the fourth wall to kind of do a full-face toothy grin or kind of almost smirk at himself as if he can't believe he said what he's just said. But in reporting my profile, one of the people I spoke with was Steve Bannon, who recounted, I mean, early on, Stephen Miller would open for Donald Trump in 2015, in 2016, that campaign, at his rallies. And Steve Bannon, again, who loves all the incendiary stuff, recalled saying to Stephen Miller, look, the point of an opening act is so the main guy doesn't have to top you, right? You have to stop saying these things because Trump can't come out there and beat it. And so people have told me in the White House, one of the things they like about him, perhaps counterintuitively, is that he is incredibly dogmatic. That intensity, maybe not the trolling, but that intensity and that passion is the same behind closed doors and in the Oval Office as you see in front of the TV cameras. And so whether you agree with him or not, you sort of always know where he stands, which is on the far extreme when it comes to immigration. Zolan,
you've watched this for a while as well. Has his ideology shifted? And we'll talk about the linchpins of the ideology in a minute, but has he shifted? Has he become more extreme? Because obviously the second Trump term is very much unlike the first Trump term.
Sure. I actually think from everyone I've talked to that Stephen's ideology has been rather consistent. It's that he's more visible and more powerful in this second term. You know, in the first term, he might have been limited in many ways to being kind of the architect and overseeing immigration policy in the Department of Homeland Security. And he was a speechwriter, of course, you know, getting involved in comms as well. And now you have somebody who, you know, is taking that ideology that was formed through his upbringing, through working with Michelle Bachmann, now to imposing that on domestic policy, foreign policy as well. Yeah. His role has expanded. If I could also follow up on the previous subject, I think that the rhetoric and the provoking, Stephen also sees that as key to implementing his policy, right? I mean, in the first term...
Shelling the beach in advance of the actual policy...
And he believes that America, as you often hear of America having a role as a sanctuary for immigrants, being a pro-immigrant country, he is trying to change the perception in the nation towards immigrants, to basically make it so that the pendulum of politics shifts and there's more of a tolerance for the policies he's trying to implement.
Leanne, talk about, so we know he was a expert at provocation. He was a serious conservative, more conservative than Republicans at the time as he was growing up. He comes to Washington. Talk about his course through Congress until he meets Trump.
Yeah, well, yes, as you said, he worked for Michelle Bachmann, who is this...
Remind us.
Michelle Bachmann is someone who actually ran for president in 2008. She was a fringe candidate, an outlier, and she was also very provocative. She crashed and burned very quickly. She was
a little bit ahead of her time in terms of... She was
kind of pre-Trump,
Lauren
before
Boebert
Trump.
before Lauren Boebert kind of person.
Yeah, absolutely. But then he found a home in Jeff Sessions, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, who was also very anti-immigrant. And ideologically, they were on the same page. Jeff Sessions was adamantly involved in comprehensive immigration reform during, the Bush and early Obama years, Bush years really, and trying to kill it. And Stephen Miller was instrumental in that. He had a reputation on the Hill. He was a comms director at the time of being way outside the mainstream. He would also, in internal comms meetings with his fellow Republican comms directors, would provocate in the same way that he does publicly. People used to just roll their eyes and dismiss him. Now he is probably the most powerful non-elected official in this country. And you still see actually that tension on Capitol Hill with Stephen Miller. People remember Stephen Miller then, and there is a lot of grumbling on Capitol Hill, even among Republicans who think that Stephen Miller's policies are going too far and will hurt them.
Right. It's hard just briefly to overstate. I covered the Gang of Eight immigration bill for the New York Times as a congressional correspondent. And this was sort of the last time bipartisan immigration had any real momentum, right? You had 4 Republicans, including Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, 4 Democrats. You had the tentative cautious, but you had the buy-in of the tech community, of the business community, of the labor community, of the activist community, of the Hispanic community. And the reason that bill essentially sank and did not come up for a vote in the House was single-handedly because of Jeff Sessions and Stephen Miller working alongside Breitbart News to kill it.
And remember, just during the end of the Biden administration, when James Lankford was working on a bipartisan bill to close the borders, and then Trump came in as a potential candidate and killed it, Stephen Miller had a role in that, too.
Right. Well, let's talk about Sessions and the jump from Sessions to Trump. Obviously, Sessions, we don't have to rehearse this one at length, but was a Trump loyalist, and Trump turned on him because Jeff Sessions appointed the special prosecutor, et cetera. How did Miller make the move to the big man?
So,
I mean, it's a classic Washington story also. It's not that unusual. But did he discard Jeff Sessions when...
Not yet. Okay. So what happened is in January of 2016, Miller was one of the very first people to come and leave Jeff Sessions' office and go to his campaign.
And this is when Trump was still improbable.
Yes, very improbable, before the Iowa caucuses, a good month before then. But Jeff Sessions, a month later, was the very first senator to endorse Donald Trump. And so they were still very close, working together to promote this enigma of Donald Trump.
Interesting.
But then, fast forward to Jeff Sessions being Attorney General, Jeff Sessions recusing himself into the Russia investigation, Jeff Sessions losing his job, being fired because of that, and the person left standing is Stephen Miller, who discarded Jeff Sessions at that moment.
When you say discarded, what do you mean?
There was no public statement of Stephen Miller supporting or saying anything nice about Jeff Sessions in that moment. And then a person close to Stephen Miller said that no one at that time was more furious at Jeff Sessions than Stephen Miller. I
mean, this goes to another question about Stephen Miller and his view of a powerful executive. I want to get to that, but let's stay on the immigration views. There's a tweet, and he tweets a lot, as we know, and he tweets very frankly about his views. There's a tweet, someone should write an alternate historical novel where Americans are the first to master the automobile, the first in flight, the first to harness the atom, the first to land on the moon, but just keep going and never open our borders to the entire third world for 60 years. Basically, what he's saying is American innovation all happened because white men, I mean, that's the interpretation here, did all of these things, and then the country lost focus because it started letting in the, quote, third world. McKay, come back to California.
Yeah.
I mean...
Because I do think that's crucial to understanding his fixation on immigration.
First of all, it's ahistorical. I mean, Americans invented plenty of things at the same time that immigrants were coming into the country. In fact, many of the people who were immigrants invented those things as new Americans. But go into this. the visceral feeling against immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously none of us can read his mind, but I think that to understand how these views formed, you have to understand the post-9/11 politics on the right in Southern California in particular, right? Post-9/11, there was a general kind of rise in xenophobia, fear of, Muslims, outsiders, foreigners. We had been through this national trauma. It's understandable to a certain extent, but Miller's particular fixation on immigration was really born of the right-wing media ecosystem in California at the time, which was always rotating around immigration issues. That, I think that if he had been, born in Cleveland or Montana or, even, Washington, D.C., I think it would have been a very different story. But the people that he idolized, the local talk radio people on the right, the kind of group of conservatives he fell in with, were always talking about immigration. And so...
extremely negatively.
Of course.
The only reason I say that is because Ronald Reagan, the greatest Republican in the history of California, was not in that camp.
Right. Something had shifted in the decades after Reagan. Some of it had to do with the right-wing backlash to George W. Bush's attempt to find a grand immigration compromise. But because he was always on the far right of the Republican Party, and because he came from California, immigration was kind of a natural wedge issue that he latched on.
So what was it? Growing up in Southern California, he saw Hispanics, he saw the Latino population as just too big, trying to dominate white America?
Well, there's sort of two things. You're talking about the post-9/11 Republican sort of backlash, against real efforts to actually have some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. What you saw was sort of a xenophobic view where you generalized many immigrants coming from the Middle East as national security threats, and you've seen that rhetoric replicated by this administration. But then when it comes to also immigrants coming from Central and Latin America, you've had, and this still exists today, this real push by conservatives of this is economic competition with people that are born in the States. Now, of course, economic studies do undercut that and show that immigrants broadly actually benefit the economy. But this is a prime example for the white grievance argument, right?
I want to stay on that for a second because Stephen Miller is Jewish, and part of his family came over here 100 years ago as refugees from anti-Semitism in Europe. When you're in your conversations with him, does that ever play into his understanding of the world and his own background as the great-grandchild of immigrants?
I'm going to introduce one data point, which may or may not be relevant, but he told me one of the books that most shaped him was Wayne LaPierre's book, the head of the NRA.
Right.
In that book, Wayne LaPierre makes an argument that the Holocaust, and I think he says something like Auschwitz, are prime examples of the need for Second Amendment rights. That to make what you will of that argument, but that if the Jewish people had been armed, they would have been able to stand up to this authoritarian genocidal regime. I think that he found a way early on to kind of meld his general right-wing worldview with his Jewish identity and background. I think it became a little more strained as he got deeper into Trump-era right-wing politics and found himself kind of swimming in waters that were, let's say, a little bit less friendly to Jews.
Yeah, I mean, because there's an element of, let's call it the racialist far right, that doesn't have fond feelings about Jews. Can I make just one brief editorial aside? I'm sorry, this prompts this thought. I wish that the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto had more guns back then, but I don't think that they still would not have been able to defeat the German army. I mean, it sounds like it's just a kind of anyway, put that aside for now. We'll do a special episode. Yeah, I'll bring it up with Wayne LaPierre the next time he's on the show.
The thing I would just add to that, too, is when you look at Stephen's comments about immigration, he does have a very narrow sort of view of which immigrants are justified to be in the United States. And it doesn't always track with the law. Like, if you go into a legal port of entry at the border, you have a legal process to come in the country. He pushes back against that, right? He pushes back against the parole system the Biden administration started. They've revamped their refugee program to focus on English-speaking refugees coming into the U.S. and not from predominantly African and also Muslim-majority countries, too. So there's a through line there of who he thinks is deserving to be in the
Well, this is why South African Afrikaners are given
the only refugees
are given privileges in that system. You know, I want to talk a little bit about his power in the White House. And I came into direct contact with this question last year during the Signal controversy when I was in that chat. J.D. Vance, everyone else, Marco Rubio, are in that chat and arguing back and forth about the utility of striking Yemen. And then Miller comes into the chat and writes, as I heard it, the president was clear, green light, but we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. And that shut down the debate. It shut down J.D. Vance. Kind of made me think, wow, Stephen Miller is worth a half hour on Washington Week if that's the case, that he's so powerful. Talk about inside the White House, what kind of power you saw.
It's hard to overstate his power inside the Trump second-term White House, in part because his purview is so much broader than just immigration, although it certainly includes immigration, but it includes trade, it includes foreign policy, it includes national security, it includes education, the entire war on the quote-unquote elite university system. Stephen Miller, in his free time, when he's not dealing with immigration, is the architect of that. And also, it's, you know, you were asking earlier if his views had become more extreme. I think it is instructive to understand him in some of the same ways we understand President Trump himself, which is that his views haven't necessarily changed. But he used those, even more than Trump in certain ways, Stephen Miller used those 4 years out of power to basically get better, stronger, faster, more ruthless. And he understood the mistakes he made in the first term, why the travel ban, EO, he wrote the first time, led to chaos at the airport. Executive order, led to chaos at the airports and got struck down in the courts. This time he knows that if you care about being hardline on immigration, it's not just important to have your people at the Department of Homeland Security, although that is important, but there's certain positions at Health and Human Services where you want a strong ally with your point of view. There's certain jobs in the State Department, in the Western Hemisphere division. So he knows now all the levers of power.
Right. But, Leigh, let me ask you this. Minneapolis, Tom Homan comes in and says, well, we're pulling out. Obviously, it did not go well. No. Certainly from a public relations perspective for the administration in Minneapolis, largely because of the 2 deaths caused by ICE agents, of protesters. Did Stephen Miller go too far this time?
It seems that way. Yeah, I think that a couple things. On his standing in the White House, he had a 40th birthday party that his wife, Katie Miller, hosted for him back in the fall, or the summer, actually. People who attended told me that they have never seen so many people in the administration in one place. It was every single cabinet member, official, Caroline Leavitt, just everyone was there.
You needed like a designated survivor who didn't go to the party.
Exactly. And it was a show of how important he is in this administration. It was also notable that there was no members of Congress there except for the Speaker of the House. Which gets back to your question, did he go too far? This is something that the president has gotten a lot of pushback on. Stephen Miller has been criticized very publicly by Democrats and very privately by Republicans.
Although Senator Tillis, a prominent Republican, does not like him at all and has told the president that.
Despises. Every single time he can publicly say how much he hates Stephen Miller, he does it. He will be talking about something totally different to a reporter, and he will bring up Stephen Miller.
He's also retiring.
He is also retiring,
but
he does have a line to the president, and he has told the president many times that Stephen Miller is doing him and the Republican Party no justice.
We did see something rare after the Preddy shooting, too, on Miller, which was him also sort of try to clean it up and say, well, look, I was getting information from CBP agents. Right. There was a period there where they tried to soften that language. Right. That's rare.
McKay, let me ask you this. What does he ultimately want? And by the way, you have like 30 seconds to answer that question.
Well, I think that he wants a lot. But I think when it comes to immigration in particular, I think that you guys are right. He has made it very clear, and even in my conversations, that he wants to entirely reframe our national understanding of our country as a nation of
He's basically in an argument with Emma Lazarus in a kind of way.
Right. I mean, there's a key moment in the first term where he was asked about the placard at the base of the Statue of Liberty.
That's the poem. Yeah.
And he completely dismisses it, like it disdainfully dismisses it. And I think that is his ideological project. If he can retire in a country that does not see immigrants as being welcome into this country, that does not see immigrants as part of the national story, he will be happy.
He's a fascinating figure, obviously the most powerful non-elected official. I think we can all agree on that, more powerful than cabinet officials. We'll talk about him again and again, obviously, but that's all the time we have for now. I want to thank our guests for joining me, and I thank you at home for watching us. You can read Ash's profile of Stephen Miller by visiting theatlantic.com. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week with The Atlantic is provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Ku and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, Charles Hamawi through the Charles Hamawi Fund, Steve and Marilyn Kerman, Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.